This is Sophia Smallstorm, and I'm doing a podcast. It's sort of a joint effort. I'm with a new friend of mine, Andy Kaufman. Everybody has heard of him. He is a very brave and brilliant medical doctor with a specialty in forensic psychiatry, and he has been making presentations and giving lots of interviews on the origins of what we call viruses today, and he has another name for this, but today's interview is not focusing on Dr. Kaufman's wonderful work on exosomes. That's his alternate name for viruses. We're going in a new direction because I want listeners to learn more about Andy Kaufman and see what else he's capable of throwing in our laps that's wondrous. Right, Andy?
Well, thank you very much, Sophia. That's quite generous of you. And I do want to expand into talking about other parts of what it's like to live as a human being and not just always be focusing on viruses.
Good. So you wanted to open this interview in your own way, so let's do that.
Yeah, so probably few people know that I've actually taught or led a guided meditation group with some teenagers that I was working with for the past year or plus. And so I thought it would be good to start off this conversation just taking a moment that we can all get in touch with the present, with the now, with what's going on around us, and put ourselves into a mindful state in just a very short time, and that would be a great place to begin this conversation. So I would like everyone to sit still for a moment, get yourself comfortable, and we're just going to take a few breaths. And as we breathe, I want you to just notice if you're breathing in or out, and just pay attention so that each moment in time you can say if you're experiencing an in-breath or an out-breath. Notice how your experience changes as you come back to the breath, how you feel a sense of being alive, how the five senses sharpen and become more alert to the world around you in the present moment. Sophia, if we simply take the time to do this periodically throughout the day, it can really help our perspective to see things much more clearly and truthfully.
Yes, absolutely it can. And people need to write themselves a little note about that and put it on their bathroom mirror.
Yes, I agree. It's a simple thing, takes a short time, and it really helps reframe your perspective, which is what we all need to do right now. And we were talking about this a little bit before the show, about our feeling of being disempowered or powerlessness over the current situation. It seems like that has been a concern of yours, and people have talked to you about that.
Yes, you know, Andy, I have my own way of looking at this, and I believe that we live today, and today contains many opportunities that will cast tomorrow and the nature of tomorrow. So we needn't look at tomorrow as being here already. We are in today. And what I'm getting from friends who are powerful researchers themselves and who have amazing minds, and, you know, they have walked all kinds of different paths and dived down into different rabbit holes and come up with original work. And I believe these people to be fearless and mighty and wonderful, you know, just like you are. And the thing is that so many of my friends are feeling rather despondent, as though they're going to be swept along in this tide that is just shaping itself to the propaganda and the misleading information that is being deluged upon us, right? We have an avalanche now of enormous Jabberwocky. I'll call it Jabberwocky, and I wanted to title that make that the title of this show, because there is so much nonsense and contradicting information about this coronavirus that's just swirling everywhere.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And most people are not willing to take the time to investigate for themselves and do their own thinking and make their own decisions and assessment about the current situation. And so it's easy to get swept up when you're not taking charge. You know, I see one of the biggest barriers is that most people, even people who are more aware of what's really going on right now, they rely on some source or person or thing outside of themselves to convey the truth of the future to them. For example, they may be waiting for a savior, perhaps in their religious faith, or a white hat, or someone to come and rescue them, and they can sit idly by. And others feel that nothing is going to help the situation. There's nothing they can do, and that someone will just take over and make everything horrible and dystopian in the future for them. And yet other people are just cowering in fear and trusting whatever CNN or the government officials are saying, and feel that they are powerless to do anything but follow the commands and mandates that come out.
May I make a distinction
Yeah.
between the set of people that you have just delineated into these three different types or three different subgroups? The people that I am communicating with are the activists, they are the researchers, they are the people who have plumbed and discovered and put information out there. And I think they are feeling that they will be swept along in this tide because the numbers are just so enormous.
Right. So perhaps they're close to the second category I talked about, the people who feel the situation is hopeless and they're aware of all of the evil strategies against us, but feel that there's nothing they can do about it. Is that somewhat accurate?
Well, yeah, that the effort that one makes, I get the 100th monkey theory presented to me a lot, and this was very popular back in, the day of 9/11. People felt that if 5% of the population became aware of a ruse or a plot or a hoax or a deception, then the rest of the population would just pick up the stride and move into that way of thinking. But may I quote, and this is not quoting, I did a terrible thing. I translated Edward Bernays, some of the things he said in 1928. I am not even going to read you the original statements because it was simple work for me to put them into the real language. So can I read the three quotes to you?
Yeah, please.
My translation of Edward Bernays, and we know who he was. He was the propaganda maestro of the 1900s, and he lived to be 100. And he shaped American advertising like nobody else.
I would say he shaped our culture.
Our culture. He was a culture maker. So here I've translated the original quote. I'm not going to read the original quote because I'm going to do what they do. I'm just going to put ideas in your head. So here's the translation by me. Crucial to a democratic society is the manipulation of the people's habits and opinions. And those who do this are the true rulers. The masses are governed, their minds molded, their tastes and ideas formed by men like me. Vast numbers of people must come together in this way if our plans are to run smoothly. A second statement, translated by me. We understand the hive mind and how it comes to be. Thus we control the people as we wish without their even knowing it. And statement number 3. No serious sociologist believes the people have any divine or wise ideas. They simply voice their collective mind, and we create that mind because we know how. We pack it with all their prejudices, symbols, and cliches.
Yeah, all those things ring very true to the present moment, don't they?
Yeah, and that's just, those are his words made simple, I made it simple. So, we're in Jabberwocky. There's a famous little clip. Apparently Jason Goodman, he was the one who was touring the hospitals in New York. He has a YouTube channel and finding them to be empty and not filled with coronavirus cases. And the attendant, EMTs and staff were just kind of just lolling around, massaging their phones like everybody else in America, and seemed to have no idea what was going on in terms of coronavirus at these hospitals. But Goodman interviewed Alan Dershowitz. Now, I want to know how he got an interview with Alan Dershowitz in the first place. I find that a bit extraordinary. And Dershowitz was saying crazy jabberwocky things. He was saying that you have no right to refuse to be vaccinated. You have to be vaccinated because you're protecting others. And Andy, you're a medical doctor, and several years ago I was watching television and I saw ads for whooping cough vaccines for adults. And the reasoning was, even though you may have had whooping cough as a child, you are an adult now, and if you're living in a household where there's small children, or you visit your grandchildren at their house, you have to be vaccinated in order to protect your grandchildren from whooping cough. And this is the logic, the illogic they're applying now to this vaccine mandate that we're all being threatened with, that you got to do it not for yourself, but for others, and you have to wear a mask to protect others. So I want you to comment on that as a medical doctor.
Yeah, well, this is similar to what I've said from early on, which is, that a quarantine is set up to contain people who are ill. And what we had are rules to contain people who are healthy, right? Saying that they're dangerous to other people. And all of the policies have been about that major shift. And this is like almost like a law philosophy shift here, right? Because instead of talking about the individual having rights and responsibilities to protect themselves, we're talking about now having responsibilities to take affirmative action to protect others, right? As being a responsibility that's lawfully mandated. So once again, it takes our focus outside to the other, right? In a sense. And I think this is also consistent with the philosophy of the Agenda 2030, sometimes known as communitarianism, but where essentially the needs or rights of the community outweigh the individual. And that's moving far away from a spiritual philosophy, which is all about individual responsibility.
Yes, and that is actually something that I was taught many years ago when I was in school somewhere, that government had deliberately taken the focus off the group and put it squarely on the individual. And that's what modern governance was about, the individual having freedoms and rights and expression and being a full, viable human being. But now we're going back in the other direction, the direction that a lot of animal species live by, which protects the group, right? Animals will sacrifice a few members of the group in order to preserve the overall cohesion, sanctity, safety of the group. And that seems to be where we're going. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's so much symbolism that represents this. And I think this has been basically a cultural evolution that's been going on for at least 100 years. So if you want to even, let's look at the word vaccine and talk about herd immunity, because those two things are highly related to what you're talking about. And so vaccine comes from I think it's a Latin root of vaca, meaning cow or cattle. And cattle is related to chattel. Right, so essentially we're being herded as slaves, as property. And there are many other words that refer to this in different lexicons. And this strategy of vaccines is very much related to that as a way of controlling everyone and putting this kind of top-down authoritarian approach.
I also wanted to bring up the parallel that I came upon just by comparison and thinking. I always think in, I guess you could say, unusual ways, creative ways maybe. But anyway, what is a vaccine and what is a vaccination and what is a hypodermic needle? Now, I had to do some research on rattlesnakes because I actually live in rattlesnake country, and I had a few encounters with rattlesnakes over the last few years. And I learned that you do not want to get bitten by a rattlesnake because even though they will truck you off to the ER and pump you full of anti-venom, whatever they call it, people around here who've stepped on rattlesnakes and gotten bitten, 80 vials of this stuff in order to prevent the necrosis from spreading through your wherever you got bitten and toward your heart and other vital organs. But I learned that you will have residual problems from a venomous snake bite for many, many, many years to come. They may never go away. You will have neurological issues, muscular issues, because the type of toxins that are put into your bloodstream by a venomous snake bite are designed to paralyze tissue, muscle tissue, and to destroy and damage neurology. They are basically neurotoxins and more. And that made me think of the hypodermic needle at the end of the syringe that's giving you the vaccination. That is the equivalent of a snake fang, right? And the material in that syringe is neurotoxic. It's got a lot of very potentially harmful proteins and oils that made from fetid stuff that they culture, and they call that live virus or vaccine culture. And it is put in your body by a medical term. I don't know if you've heard of this. You're a forensic medical guy. Effraction, have you heard of that term?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Okay, effraction is actually an older English word. We don't use it today. It means burglary. And vaccinations are burglarizing their way into your body because they are not coming in the way these, let's just concentrate on the proteins and oils, the squalene that they use in the vaccines, the adjuvant 65, I think that was peanut oil, and then the complex full protein molecules that would be in that vaccine culture. We are supposed to only get proteins and oils through the mouth under normal circumstances, and they are then, you could say, taken apart, disassembled by our gut, the bacteria in our gut. The oils are separated into lipids and the proteins into amino acids. And so one of the problems that people get with leaky gut is that as the cell membrane, the gut membrane opens up, half digested, half disassembled materials get into the bloodstream, like proteins and oils, and this causes the Th2 immune system to be over-triggered, and you get enormous antibody production, cross-referential antibody production, and then you have autoimmune disease. So I learned that vaccines operating by effraction, burglarizing their way into the body, then trigger and over-trigger the Th2 immune system because it's as though the gut has leaked. And all these proteins and oils that are full in their assemblage are there, and the Th2 immune system goes, what's this? Th1, the cell-mediated immune system, the gut is a part of that, should have disassembled all this. Now I have all this work to do. And the Th2 system goes nuts, overproduces, overreacts with antibody creation, and then we have autoimmune disease. So the parallel, I'm going back to it because I don't want to forget it, is the snake bite.
Yeah, well, Sophia, you make a lot of good points there, and I think that really you can look at the vaccination as a trauma ritual, really. So our body naturally gets exposed and learns about what's in our environment, as you say, is not through a needle in the skin like a snake bite. Right, that has a lethal intent in nature. But it's through our digestive system, for the most part, and through our breathing system that things from the environment get into our body. And we have very good barriers on the skin to prevent that from happening, because then harmful substances get straight away access, especially to the bloodstream, would be the most harmful, because then they can be easily disseminated around the body. The injection for a vaccine goes deeper beneath the skin into the muscle layer, where it's less easy to protect it because the immune system is concentrated in the skin or underneath the skin. So we have this situation where you're getting this traumatic, like physically traumatic and often emotionally traumatic experience through the injection. right? Because an infant may, not struggle or anything the first time they get one of these injections, but subsequently, it's often a situation where the medical personnel and the parent have to restrain this child because it's such a traumatic experience. And this affects how the body processes what's put into it. And you're right, they put all of these adjuvant agents, and essentially many of them are purposely toxic materials because they're meant to, quote unquote, stimulate the immune system. And what this means is really aggravate and, disturb the immune system because these are toxic substances that are going in there. And that, they say that is to produce a stronger immune response to the target, but there's really no evidence that that is what happens. And the non-specific response that you describe, like similar to what happens with a leaky gut type of situation where the bloodstream is now flooded with these foreign substances, including proteins, lipids, as well as chemicals like preservatives like polysorbate 80 and other materials, and of course the metals, that it causes all of these things to be produced. That's why, for example, we see people getting false positive antibody tests to like the HIV test after receiving a vaccination. It's because of this irritation and this response that our body has to protect itself. So this whole process, right, is some kind of a trauma ritual with nefarious purposes to it.
Yeah, and there are many of those very traumatic rituals in our Western culture, and somebody has suggested to me she is intensely against allopathic medicine, so please don't be offended, but basically that all of allopathic medicine and its practices are satanic, diabolical, traumatic, to use a mild word, to the recipients of these practices. Things like putting catheters in the body, and medical professionals are trained to do it, without batting an eye, and you're sitting there receiving a penile catheter or some such thing, right? And it's excruciating, I've heard. But I wanted to ask you about this new form of vaccinating, if you know anything about it or can explain it, because I don't quite understand the mechanism by which it's supposed to operate. And that would be immunoprophylaxis by gene transfer, also known as IgT. Can you tell us anything about that?
Yeah, well, I think this is referring to the DNA vaccines, like Inovio's product. So what this is that they have created a circular piece of DNA, which is based upon a bacterial plasmid, and it contains some gene that they say is from the alleged virus. And they inject this similarly to other vaccinations, but they add 2 additional needles that deliver an electric current, and that causes something called electroporation, where the cells create little holes in their membrane, and that allows the DNA pieces to get inside the cell. Now, what they say is that our own cells are going to then make the product of these genes, these allegedly viral genes, and somehow our cells making those is going to tell our immune system to make antibodies or some kind of protection against a virus. I think there's several problems to the logic of this, and it has yet to be experimentally shown to be successful in any meaningful way. But how can something our own body produces warn our body about a foreign invader, if there was such a thing? So what I think is most likely is that they have some kind of gene there that's going to produce some type of response or change in our physiology or our phenotype that is going to be desirable for the control system.
How about, again, I have a very crude understanding of IgT from what I've read, and that is that it's going to prompt, instead of the white blood cells making antibodies, it will prompt the muscle cells to make the antibodies. I don't even know how that's possible, but that seems to be the quick summary they give us when they write articles about IgT.
Well, muscle cells are not known to be capable of creating antibodies. I think what they were trying to say is the muscle cells are going to make the viral protein, and that the B cells from our immune system will somehow be alerted to that and create antibodies to it.
Okay. Well, once again, then I read summaries that were too slick. But
Perhaps.
yeah, I mean, this is what I've seen this kind of thing pop up here and there in the news, and John Rappaport has written about it as well. But that was what I understood it to be, that they were going to prompt muscle cells to do the work that the white blood cells were doing. But anyway, that could be way too, way too.
Right. Well, listen, this is really so theoretical, but what I think the take home message is that we're going to be genetically modified organisms as a result of this procedure. And whatever the gene is, I would say we don't really know because they have not, sequenced a genome from a purified virus. So whatever gene sequences they are using, we really don't know what those even are.
I would like to just introduce this path that I've noticed in my readings and thinking over the past 10 years or so. Chemical medicine was big pharma, matching a disease to a drug and presuming that you could come up with a drug, a chemical compound, man-made chemical compound that would quote-unquote cure or treat or manage a disease, and that the diseases were germ-based, right? This is just the platform. And then we moved into radiation medicine and using screenings and lots of different radiation diagnostic methods to determine what was wrong with us and even treat us. So radiation therapy, for instance. But now we're moving into genetic medicine. And that's the medicine of the future. And they want to turn our genes on and off to do exactly what you're saying, genetically modify us so that we will be protected from this or that eventuality based on our epigenetics, our family history, even personal history, recurrence of this or that. So I think that they're going to convince everybody that anything done genetically that's like the frontier of nanobiotech, and they want the public to embrace that, and they're going to do it through this propaganda. They're going to pack our heads with all the right bits and pieces, cliches, summaries, what are they called when it's just a one-sentence, one-liners? There's a word for that. How come I can't think of it? They're going to give us sound bites. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, sound bites.
Sound bites and cliches that will make us all run with open arms to genetic medicine. And this coronavirus is possibly the channel into that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a place that they want to go. And I think this all really fits in the construct of initiation ritual in terms of how they move us forward, like you were describing, into accepting this new way of being that is really their hidden agenda, right? So if we look at initiation rituals, there's an excellent video on this that I want to play a clip from a little bit later by TruthStream Media. And they talk about 3 stages of an initiation ritual, and they basically apply it to the current situation. And the first stage is isolation. And this is what we've been experiencing so far. It involves several aspects, but the isolation part itself is to keep us from the influence of others so that we may shed our current beliefs or attachments to whatever the initiation is trying to reform us from. And it's important to be in a different environment than we're in all the time. So instead of spending time outdoors or at work, right, we're in our homes that we maybe haven't spent a lot of time there or in the way that we are now. So it's a different experience preparing us for a different future. And several aspects involved in this include repetition, as you were mentioning, of sound bites like there is no going back, right? There'll be a new normal. There'll be a new normal, right? You've heard practically every world leader and every broadcast announcer say that phrase over and over again. You have confusion, right? Which is keeping people on the unknown, not knowing what's coming next. Things are going up and down, right? Like we had these models predicting, crazy numbers of deaths, and then we have contradictory information from the real data showing that actually not too many people died, and but then they extend the lockdown measures and say the second wave is coming, right? So it's kind of an up and down, back and forth kind of confusion that you don't really know what's coming next or what to think, so that you're easier to surprise. We have the trauma aspect, which is extremely important. And it's sort of can represent the death of the old self. And death is an important part of the ritual. There are, people who have practiced human sacrifice throughout the ages. And we see the fear of death and the display of death in the media as being very traumatic going through this time. And then we have the wearing of masks, which is often used in initiation rituals, and essentially to cover the old self, to provide separation between the old and the new, and several other aspects. Maybe you want to talk a little bit more about that, and we can show this clip first and then maybe have further discussion.
The wearing of masks may be required. Masking has traditionally played an important role in rituals of this kind.
Meantime, New York City has joined Los Angeles advising residents to cover their faces. Well, we've already seen a big jump in the number of people wearing masks. Well, they've announced that anybody who is flying on the plane is going to be having to wear a mask. See here right behind me, about half the folks in line at this market basket right now are wearing masks.
Oh.
Today there was a mandate that went into effect across the entire country to wear a mask.
Enabling and hastening the suppression of ego to help facilitate a death of the old identity before the identification with and manifestation of a new one. Disguised under a mask and hidden away, the initiate is more easily able to transcend the self, pushed further toward that invisible line.
So what I appreciated about that video, which is much longer than the 40 seconds or so that we're showing, was that it connected for me the real spookiness, the real dark nature of this mask meme that's just been adopted by everyone.
Yeah, I mean, criminals, bandits, right, wear masks. They're trying to hide their identity, and they're up to something sinister. Even in New York State, there's actually a law on the penal code, which is criminal law, that prevents you from wearing masks in public, especially if you're loitering or soliciting. And interestingly, they only have one exception for this, which is for a masquerade or costume party event that has a permit from the city. So by following this mandate in New York, you're breaking the penal law by following an executive order. It's quite fascinating, but that really codifies the relationship to criminal or immoral activities with the mask. And so that's what you have being represented in part by this aspect of the ritual.
And also, imagine a year ago or 6 months ago, if you walked into a bank wearing a bandana around your face. It would cause mayhem. The police would be called, right?
That's an excellent point. I hadn't really thought about that, but you're absolutely correct.
And now everyone in the bank wears masks. And honestly, somebody said hi to me. I think it was a lifeguard. He had the most atrocious mask on. It was like a head covering as well. And I said to him, I have no idea who you are. Because they've taken away our faces. They took away our handshakes first and told us don't shake hands with anybody because you would spread the virus. Then they took away our hugs and our proximity to one another. And now our faces. And they are, the isolation thing is one thing, but the inability to recognize your friends, your associates, your neighbors, this is very profound.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is the most important aspect. It is the breaking of the connection between people. And I think this is a great way to talk about the spiritual approach that can take you out of this trap and out of the flow of this momentum into hopelessness, and which is that we are all connected to each other, right? And to the all. Our consciousness is one, and we all share these aspects, although we have an individual vessel that we experience the world through. We are absolutely all connected. And by putting physical barriers between us, it's an attempt to sever that connection, because that will make us lost. So one of the most important things I believe in approaching this situation and putting yourself in a positive place has to do with increasing your connection to others around you. So this requires active effort to find people that are willing to connect with you, even beyond your immediate family. But of course, this is extremely important within your immediate family. And if you're able to reach out and maintain connections with people, and I'm talking about being in their physical presence without any distance or separation. I'm talking about physical touch between people, eye contact, being able to fully see each other, all of our facial expressions and nonverbal communication. This is a vital aspect to breaking out of the prison that we appear to be in.
Andy, what do you think of your not knowing how the other is going to respond to your friendly attempt to maintain contact? For instance, in my neighborhood, which is a charming neighborhood, semi-rural, we are walking a lot because the gyms are closed. The beaches were closed for a long time. They're open now. So lots of neighbors will come upon each other taking walks. We have a few trails around here, and we see each other on the trails and on the neighborhood roads. And I notice that people will actually cross the street when I'm approaching, whether they have their masks on or not. And I have a neighbor who is a psychiatrist, and since this COVID-19 thing, she motions me away to the proper 6-foot length. Anytime I walk past her, she's willing to have a discussion, a little short conversation, but I have to be, and her hand is waving at me, pushing me to the requisite 6 feet. So what do you say to somebody when you try to approach and this is what they do?
Well, I've certainly experienced that myself quite a bit, and I would say that most people are like that in a public setting, although some places it's much more severe, like the grocery store, for example. I find that when I go hiking, that there are many fewer people who are afraid of me, and most people there are much more likely to engage. So I feel people out. I try to make eye contact. And I see how they respond to that. And many times they do just look down and walk further away to distance themselves. And I respect that from those people. The folks who are in between, who maybe are willing to have a conversation, but at social distance, for those people, I would simply say, and I have done this on a few occasions, that I'm not really comfortable interacting with you this way. Are you willing to, talk about what the reasons for it or why it's necessary? And if they're not willing to talk about that, then I would simply limit my interactions with them. I would maintain respect and friendliness, but it would be very, brief and superficial. But what I've done is, maybe it might be easier for me being a little bit in the public eye, that some people have reached out to me from my area and let me know that they feel the same way. But I always immediately try to ask them to get together in some way, or keep a close relationship, because I want to build up a network of people. And, what I've done is I reached out to lots of other parents, for example, to say, any of you willing to have your kids come over for a play date. And I didn't find too many people, but I did find a couple. And I found, one family at first, and then a second one later. And I know that there are going to be more joining in. So you have to put out the effort. You have to put out feelers, be willing to take a risk to arrange these things or find people in your community. But I know they're there because there are a lot of people who feel the way that we do about this. They're just not the majority, right? And they're not necessarily our next door neighbor. Or if they are, maybe they are too embarrassed to say so publicly, but they'd be willing to, come to your house or have you come in their house and visit that way. So I think if you put the effort out, you can find people to connect with. And I feel that this is really vital. I mean, one of the biggest reasons I think for this separation is, and for the home lockdown, is to keep people separate, because if people are together and they start talking about some of the inconsistencies of what's going on, then they're more likely to figure things out and make different choices. And this would be very dangerous to the empire who is orchestrating this event.
So when you mention play date, you mean with your children, obviously, because you have small children. And then maybe because you're a doctor, they think, oh, well, his house will be safe. He's a doctor. He knows how to keep things, in the right form when we go over for this play date, our family. But I also wanted, because of this whole, we have to sanitize every surface, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about halide toxicity, the amount of chlorine bleach and other very strong disinfectants that are being used on surfaces everywhere in order to convince people that the environment is safe. And I was doing a little research on rubbing alcohol, ethanol, and the CDC and EPA have certain explanations as to what should be used on what substance, on what surface. So we use disinfectants that contain powerful chemicals, harsh agents that will kill bacteria, bactericides, germicides. We use those only on surfaces, but they must not be used on human skin, I found out, which makes complete sense. And then alcohol, rubbing alcohol or other, there are a lot of essential oils that are also antibacterial. You can use that on your skin. But what's happening, Andy, is that people are constantly touching surfaces that have had germicides used on them, right?
Well, it's even more than that, because they're also breathing in all the aerosols from all these cleaning products. So when I was at the grocery store last week, they wouldn't let me put my groceries on the conveyor belt until they finished with the previous customer and then sprayed and wiped down the conveyor belt before I could put my groceries on it. Right. And so this was a little bit frustrating because it was going to delay the experience, but the cashier was very stern about it. And when she actually did this, she sprayed, I could smell it, was an ammonia-based cleaner, like a glass cleaner. And it was basically all these vapors were just wafting in my face. I mean, I had to take several steps back and I could still appreciate the strong odor. Right. So this practice of sanitizing everything and using all of these harsh chemicals, we're getting exposed to this because all these aerosol spray bottles and pump spray bottles, right, they create aerosol particles, and you're going to breathe them. They're going to get on your skin, and things that get on your skin get absorbed. And like you said, you touch the surfaces, right? And on the skin also, they're going to affect your natural microbes that live there that serve a symbiotic function with your body. So one of the main causes of all the illness that we face in our lives today in our culture is from exposure to toxic substances, and many of them are man-made chemicals. So we're actually increasing our exposure to these things, and inside of our homes is where it's particularly dangerous because there's very minimal air circulation and filtration. And indoor air quality is notoriously poor and unhealthy, and we're basically adding a bunch of additional toxic substances to that are going to be recirculating around our house if we're doing this all the time. So this is really something I've been concerned about and has not been really talked about or focused on much in the discussion.
And Andy, they would tell you that, oh, you're supposed to wear a mask anyway, so you're not going to be inhaling our ammonia or our Clorox or any of this stuff that we're using, and it's perfectly safe. Another thing they say is, what's the lesser of two evils? That we should be using this bleach and eradicating the coronavirus for your sake, or that you don't want to inhale the droplets from our bleach and our ammonia or glass cleaner, and then the coronavirus, proliferates.
Well, what's really missing from an understanding of how to approach this, because there's really almost no need at all for any type of disinfecting cleaners. Certainly, an essential oil added to a mixture of water and vinegar is stronger than you really need, even it's more than adequate. And the only thing that really needs to be cleaned with a product like that is dying tissue, because dying tissue is what supports microbes to decompose it. And in the decomposition process, there are toxic substances created. And that can be dangerous. It can cause food poisoning, and most of us have experienced that in our lifetime. We also need to use these kind of cleaners for the bathroom, because what comes out of us into the toilet is also basically dead material, dead organic material, and toxic substances that our body has removed. And we don't want to be exposed to those things. But aside from those two examples, there's really no reason at all to use any kind of cleaner that would be disinfecting or that would kill or harm microorganisms, because they're simply not dangerous.
And the microorganisms that all this use of harsh cleaners are going to harm would be our own biome, our gut biome and the biome on our skin. All of that is going to be wiped out or severely disabled by inhalation and absorption of all of this Clorox and ammonia.
Yeah. Well, no, those hand sanitizers, right, that are largely alcohol based, they have that effect. And, they're wanting people to use them, 100 times a day. The proposals for returning to school that I've seen from both Canada and the United States, basically, every time you leave or enter someplace, you're given another squirt of hand sanitizer. And this is going to be very harmful. I mean, the alcohol is actually a poison in and of itself, right? So it's going to harm the skin, but it's going to keep killing all of your normal microbes over and over again.
Yeah, I read that rubbing alcohol it's not an antifungal material, but it is an antibacterial, and you can't use that much of it, obviously. We have to be breathing and living. Zach Bush, who developed the product Restore, he advocates that people take walks in different kinds of environments to breathe the biome of those environments. He says, you should inhale over your dog, because your dog's fur contains so many microbes, and you want to diversify your own microbiome. You don't want to limit it. So I predict that people are going to see a lot of illness because they're using too many harsh chemicals in their environments. And then also we have to talk a little bit about wrapping this mask around your face and the crud that will build up on its interior, all of your oral bacteria in that moist, humid environment on the inside of the mask. And then I have had so many people tell me, people who work in stores, clerks that I know, that they get headaches and they have sore throats from wearing the mask, because they're re-inhaling all of their own bacteria, their efflux, upon their breath, and then also too much carbon dioxide that they're re-inhaling their own, and not enough oxygen.
Yeah, well, I would say that what you were referring to about, breathing in or being exposed to microbes in different environments, I think that that's a really important way that our microbes can exchange genetic information with the environment that we are around, that can give information basically about what's in the environment, how it's changing, and can help our body function more optimally in that environment. And so we are limiting that experience substantially at the present time. And what was the other point that you were talking about?
The re-inhalation of
Yes, yes. Well,
CO2.
I would refer people to Russell Blaylock. He wrote an excellent review article that covers all of the studies with respect to how masks can be cause you to have health problems. And so two of them are hypercapnia, which basically means that you can't exhale as much CO2 because of the restriction of the mask, and you build up carbon dioxide in your blood, which puts you into an acidic pH over time, especially if you're wearing a mask while you're jogging or doing some kind of exercise. And so this essentially puts you into a respiratory acidosis, which can have all sorts of bad outcomes. You also have hypoxia because you can't inhale enough air to get quite enough oxygen. So you have the combination of these two things can lead to respiratory distress. But what you were talking about is also really important, that exhalation is one of our body's primary detoxification pathways. So each time we breathe out, we're actually removing substances from the blood that are volatile enough to leave in our breath. We're also removing particulates and various microbes that may be anywhere in our airway system that come out with the outbreath. So just like you said, we're essentially concentrating these substances and organisms on the inside of the mask, and then every time we breathe in, we're breathing them back in. So we're essentially re-toxifying ourselves through this process. And we're also breathing in, by the way, materials from the mask itself. And depending on what that is, it could be pieces of fiberglass or other fibers. It could be volatile organic compounds involved in the manufacturing process or other synthetic materials. We just don't know what everything might be, but those things also have the potential to cause harm. So, physically speaking, we're harming ourselves in many ways by wearing these masks.
So the ritual includes harm to us, disconnection from our environment, from the beneficial microorganisms in our environment, and disconnection from each other. And also, I think it's spooky. It's very spooky just to see the eyes of a person and to have to tell what they're saying. I can't even understand people who are talking from behind a mask. It's so muffled. So the communication process is impaired, right?
Yes.
Recognition process, on all the nuances that you get from a person's face. You know when they're kidding, you know when they're half smiling, you know when they're... The only way you can tell now that a person is smiling is because they have crinkles by their eyes that form.
Yeah, it's very, very difficult. And in fact, one of the reasons I gave for refusing a mask at my job as a psychiatrist was that because people often tell me their most intimate and darkest secrets, that they couldn't see my reaction when they disclose those things, and they could easily assume that I am ridiculing or shaming them. And that would be something that could actually totally turn around the experience of disclosing something like that and make it even more traumatic and make it violate all of the trust in the therapeutic relationship. So this face covering practice has quite profound consequences in terms of how we relate to each other. So in my opinion, one of the most important things that we should be doing is refusing to cover our face with a mask or any other type of material, because we need to continue our ability to communicate and connect with others in order to keep going in a world that we would want to continue to live in and exist in.
I wholeheartedly agree with you, and I think it's admirable that you flatly refuse the mask practice in your professional life. And also, who's going to tell their deepest, intimate, revelations to somebody who's got a mask on and looks like a spook or a bandit, right? I mean, you're not even going to invite that kind of disclosure, maybe.
No, of course, it's not possible. Sophia, I'd like to move into a sort of resolution type of part of our discussion, if we might, and talk about what are the things or practices or way of thinking about our situation and our position in the world that can help us transcend some of these traps and strategies against us.
I would love to do that. Do you want to start?
Oh, well, I was hoping you would start.
Well, I'll tell you this. We are living today. Today is what we have. And tomorrow has not come. They don't have a vaccine yet. Terrible things aren't happening to me right this minute, or to you, because we're on this nice call and exchanging these great ideas. And yeah, if terrible things were happening, then we would have to move into that kind of mode and deal with it. But right now, we have today, and today is a time when I believe I should be whole and be extremely optimistic and experience today with joy, rather than experience today with irritation and discomfort and anger. So I am very much in favor of looking at how am I vibrating to yesterday, to today, and to tomorrow. If I am vibrating or dreading tomorrow and looking at the future with anxiety and fear, that's the kind of future I'm going to walk into, because the present it's a fence you're sitting on, and the present is constantly spilling into the future.
That's right. So we each have a choice of how we take a perspective on looking at all these things, right? We can certainly focus on the oppression and limitations that are going on right now, but like you said, is that our actual experience right now in this moment? And if we consider our actual experience and frame it in this positive way, then it gives us a much healthier perspective and an empowering perspective on how we can move forward.
And also, Andy, I believe that the present moment constantly brings you adventures. Even the COVID-19 has brought me the most indescribable adventures through people I've had to meet or I've met by paths I had to take which wouldn't have been normal. And my life has been extremely active in this way and enriched, and there's plenty of diversity, even though a lot of our existence now feels like Groundhog Day, right? You get up and you do the same thing, and you can't go to these places that you wish you could go to, and tomorrow is the same. You get up, you run. Your friend was telling me, I run my 5 miles and I get on my emails and I stay home. And that's COVID-19, is constant Groundhog Day.
Yes, it is. It's quite a Twilight Zone episode. But, we get so stuck in the material existence, right? Like you refer to this as the 3D, but this does not necessarily have to be our reality, right? That we can see the set of potentialities and possibilities in the world. And that if we can spend our time with a positive perspective, not 100% of the time, but overall, and we can spend time working towards, which means thinking about as well as taking action about the things that we would like to experience in the future, or the possibilities of how the world could become a more enriching place, how this could be the end of the empire ruling over us, and we could emerge as truly free beings with our own authority and our feet firmly entrenched on the land as a result of this.
Yeah, and I like to remind people that what's happening now, this New World Order, the entire book, the encyclopedia of the New World Order being thrown at us all at once, this is the Olympics for us. We have been training for this. We have been looking things up and thinking critically and independently for many years, most of us. And so what are we afraid of? Let's roll up our sleeves. Let's throw the discus, the javelin, as we have trained ourselves to do, and let's perform. If all of us performed as we have trained ourselves, then we might be magnificent.
Absolutely. So I'd like to read a quote from Neil Kramer, who's been one of my most influential spiritual teachers, that I think sums up some of these sentiments. As you present your inner being in all its pristine openness to the divine loving creator that encompasses you, you will instantly gain a perspective that is life-changing. Less will bother you. You will be stronger. You will know more. You will love more.
Well, that's very pithy and very beautiful. And it also is telling you something. It's almost like guaranteeing for you something, and I think people need that.
Absolutely, because the future is ours, and there is a guarantee of good things if you take the time to explore truthfulness, to transcend the material world, to realize your potential, to stand up for your freedom, for your justice, to connect with people in all the ways we're meant to, and to realize our true nature as humans in the world. This is the guarantee to a better future.
That's beautiful, and thank you. Thank you so much. I think we did a very broad discussion here.
Yeah, we definitely covered a lot of ground, and we explored some areas which will help us figure out how to continue to understand this transitional time that we're experiencing.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm not sure exactly where this interview will go up, but I want it to go up in multiple places because I think that you have presented a facet or facets of yourself that people might not be that familiar with even, and so this is another way to get to know how full you really are.
Well, I think, this is really the time that we need to shift our focus a little bit towards our path to the future. And so I'm glad that you wanted to have this discussion, and we got this out there to the world. And I want to say also that one of the silver linings of this experience, the adventures you talked about, is that it brought us together, and we have been able to explore many ideas together that have really helped me along the way. So I appreciate you being willing to have these discussions with me as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you to all the listeners, and keep following Dr. Kaufman. He also gives individual consultations, right? Do you want to tell people about that?
Yeah, sure. I do natural healing consultations for every type of health issue that you might be experiencing, and you can contact me through my website at andrewkaufmanmd.com for more information and to request that, as well as reaching out to me with any other type of communication that you wish.
And for those listeners who don't know about my store, avatarproducts.com, where I have shared for many years the bioremediation products that I have come across. Many of them are magnesium-based, iodine-based. Then there's a wonderful product, Restore. I also sell cell phone shielding cases in many different fabrics and styles. So I would invite people to see that website, avatarproducts.com, and also to find out more about Andy Kaufman. You've got to see the picture on his website, his picture. It is an absolutely blissful photograph, even though he tells me it was a selfie, right?
Yes, it was.
It's the best photo. All right, so that's andrewkaufmanmd.com, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, we've got to see that. Well, bye, and thank you to everyone.
Bye now.